Welcome to the Pastor's Podcast. This is Pastor Scott with Pastor Brian.
Hey.
And Meredith Storrs.
Hi.
I thought that it had been not as long that you'd been on.
Since I'd been on
That's
the
not
podcast.
that's not a sentence. Whatever I just said, as far as recording audio, that is a bad way to go about it.
It's good that Matt's not here.
It has been longer than I thought since you
Yes.
have been on the podcast.
It's true.
That's what I meant to say.
I have one more child than I had last time I was here.
That's impressive. And
Yes.
you were pretty pregnant.
Yeah, I was right at the
okay.
end.
I'm sorry. Pregnancy is probably a zero-sum game. Either you are or you aren't.
This is
I don't know
true.
If there's a more pregnant.
Well, so then I wonder actually if you get toward the end, do you become slightly less pregnant because the baby's about to come? So is there a curve
At what point
there,
are you the
or-
most
I don't know. I'm not a scientist.
And
so.
this is the riveting information you are going to learn at the Manhood and Womanhood Conference. These are the
Yes.
questions that everyone's
That we will
asking that
discuss.
we are going to answer.
I'll be more prepared to answer that in a month.
Brian's so pained. So pained. I'm excited to talk with you guys in this context because we've been talking for so long and in so many different formats about the topics of manhood and womanhood, about how to think about them, about what biblical manhood and womanhood is. I'm really excited for our church family to get to glean from a lot of the work and conversations that have happened. And I really am edified by our conversations, really enjoy them. And so even just this setting, I think people are going to be blessed by. But I wanted to do this to kind of prime the pump ahead of May 21st, 9 to 5. Our mega conference, all day conference on manhood and womanhood coming up. Brian, I know you talked about it a little bit this morning in God's Activity, but why are we doing this? Why, other than we're trying to, do the things we planned in 2020? Why?
Finally.
That's right. Why are we still doing this? 2 years later, when we didn't have to, right? Why did we go back and be like, no, this is still really important,
Right.
now?
Haven't we moved on or something like that? I guess a lot of things are like that. The cultural winds change a lot.
Yeah.
I think that's probably why, one of the main reasons why we're doing this is that this is something that doesn't really change. No matter what you think about whatever hot button issues are at any given point in, a culture, you're always a man or a woman. So basically our lived experience, what it means to be human for us is always expressed through, man or woman, man and woman. And so that's a big deal. It's a big deal to have that be a thing. And so I think kind of what I said this morning is that there's a lot of ways that you don't necessarily, a lot of people don't necessarily know what that means for them. There's loose ideas. And it is kind of like that thing where you think you know what it is until you think harder about it. And you go, wait, do I even know about this at all? The more questions you ask, the more you think about it. Wait, what does it? What does it mean? Is it really just I happen to have a differently shaped body? Is that all there is to it? Does that have any ramifications or any implications? The Bible talks about, gender and man and woman. What does that mean for us? Christians talk a lot about gender, especially certain parts of Christianity talk a lot about gender. So is that right or wrong? Are they talking about it well or poorly? A lot of people just don't know what to do with the fact that they're a man or a woman besides negative things. And so I think for me, it's important to be able to know why God called it good that he made men and women and how it's good that I am a man or woman. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, Mayor. But from your perspective, what are the questions? What are the big questions that you hope we're able to address in this conference and in the work that we've been doing in this space?
I really think that a lot of women, in adulthood, wrestle with, am I arranging my life in the right way? And, is it okay to work and have children? Is it okay if I earn more than my husband? Is it okay if my personality is this way? Or my brother's personality is that way. Like, are there things that are wrong about me because of some of the cultural messages that maybe I got either from the world, from the church, or, answering some of those kinds of questions, I think will be really valuable and something I hope that we can tackle well. And then I think also about parenting, like, how do I communicate this either to my own children or in mentorship relationships? How do we pass along to younger men and women what it means to be part of the family of God, what it means to be male in the family of God or female in the family of God? Because we're shaping a generation that has very different messages than, I wasn't even asking some of these kinds of questions as a kid, and my kids are. And so I hope that we can find language that will help us talk about it well, and in a way that's like exciting and inspiring and makes people feel good about who they are.
Yeah. That's one of the things that's so exciting to me about this, because I realized in raising my kids, Laura and I have had this conversation more than once, as we discover who they are and their different personalities, their different interests, things like that. I'm like, I'm not even sure exactly what I should be teaching them. It means to be a man. It means to be a woman, like biblically, right? I have some ideas and some from culture, but a lot of the ideas I have also, I feel like I'm constantly second guessing because either the world tells me, no, that's not it. And actually that can be damaging, or the culture of the church tells me, no, that's not it, and can be potentially damaging. And so I'm kind of like, wait, what is it? I'm fascinated by this, and I'm excited that we are doing it. I think it's really important that we are doing this, particularly for the sake of our local church here in West Los Angeles and the questions that we are asking. I think in one sense, we don't need to make the case for the fact that the world has lost its mind on these questions, right? Like we could talk for 10 minutes about the way in which the culture in the world has, like, abandoned a biblical definition of manhood and womanhood. I'm a little bit more curious as to how where you see our kind of Christian culture failing to provide that clear biblical vision in a way that makes this teaching at this depth necessary. Like, what are the messages or the lacks that you see, even in our understanding as Christians, that makes talking at length and in depth about biblical manhood and womanhood such an important thing for us to do in this moment?
You go.
I really think that a lot of the conversation is coming from different parts of the country that may not be living the experience that we have in LA. And so I think sometimes we forget that to be American isn't one size fits all, and that there's really different pressures and social struggles depending on where you're at in the country. And so for us to be able to talk about this and really try to speak to the Los Angeles culture and the unique challenges that we might be facing here is going to sound different than the way a pastor in Minnesota would preach, which would be so helpful for the people in Minnesota, hopefully, because they're speaking to their context. And so I think that that's kind of a part of why here, why now, why we want to actually take some time, because it's not just, we do need to talk about the message of the Bible, but we want to talk about it in a way that's actually helpful for us today. In the same way that 100 years from now, they're still going to need to have this conversation because they're going to be dealing with different cultural pressures, different social challenges.
Yeah, I think there's the message people tend to get right now, I think, is just, it's always no.
Yeah.
Like, I think men get told no. Like your gender is basically, it's sort of, your gender is really not important unless it goes wrong, is the message you hear, right? So like it's not to be a man is whatever, whatever. Just don't let it go bad. If it goes bad, then it's a really big deal.
Right. And women here,
women
like,
too, yeah.
Be a woman, do these things, except these are the things you're not allowed to do.
Right.
So make sure you don't accidentally do one of those things you're not allowed to do.
Yeah. And so you end up with this kind of messaging in the church that kind of has this, there's no positive vision. There's nothing like rich or beautiful. And even when it tries to get that way, at least in my somewhat limited experience, it always ends up coming up. The beautiful stuff is just really like a prelude to the important stuff, which is what you can and can't do, what you should and shouldn't do, what you should and shouldn't be like. And so that's tough. It's tough to be told that this thing that seems pretty important, I should basically just ignore unless it goes really sour, and then I'm a big problem. So that I think the beauty of this conference to me is I think that's not a really thorough biblical way of talking about this. And I think that trying to get at what Scripture says about these things, it's so hard to do this because when I say that, I hear all the things I've heard about that topic in my head. Now, if you're listening to this, I don't know what your experience has been with these things, but I've been around the church a long time and like our kind of area of the Christian world a long time. And so like, I just hear so much about biblical masculinity, biblical womanhood. Like I'm right now even trying to kind of grab at new terms. Like, how do I not give those connotations? Because I think a lot of that immediately, don't pass go, don't collect $100, go directly to what you can and can't do activity-wise in the church and maybe in the home. And that's just not how the Bible portrays manhood and womanhood. It's not how the Bible portrays what men and women are. And in a lot of ways, I think one of the biggest problems is that because we don't know how to answer that question, what is a man and what is a woman, besides just like bare biology. And even then, there's everyone's real reticent. Besides, we don't know that. And so that means that you can never know if you're doing a good job at it. Like, if you don't know what a knife's supposed to do, you can't tell if it's a good knife or a bad knife. So you literally have no ability to know if you're being a good man or a bad man in terms of your manhood, or a good woman or a bad woman in terms of your womanhood. And obviously the goal of the conference isn't to like parse out, okay, you're a good man. But the point is like, that's such a hard way to go about life in this thing that seems built into us at a very deep level and something that's very important. So it's the fact that I can define if I ask someone, they can define what an introvert is better than they can define what a man is really fascinating to me. And as Christians, we can say things like, if I ask someone, who is Jesus? There's an immediate answer. If I say, what is a man and what's a woman, or what's a human being? They'll get to an answer, but it's harder. It takes longer. We just haven't exercised this muscle. There's a whole slew of reasons for that, like in the Christian tradition. But this isn't something that we have. It's not the Trinity. We don't have like a creed on this, where it's like, oh, it's this. And so there's a way that there's just kind of not a gap in like Christianity or Christian development, but especially now, I think we're seeing this does need a lot more focused attention because we have a bunch of people trying to live as humans who are actually men and women. And the only human you ever see is a man or a woman. So we have to be able to factor that in somehow in a positive way. And that messaging just isn't out there. I think it's all kind of negative.
Yeah, that's been like, as we have had these conversations, and we've been talking about this for several years now, like I leave our conversations with such a sense of rest and hope and joy and delight. And that's what I want for our church family, to be able to talk about these topics. And it doesn't feel like, okay, well, here's the ways that I'm messing this up, as opposed to like, wow, like I never noticed that I was living out my womanhood in this way and that way and that way. And it was just happening. And to be able to sort of rest and find like delight in the way that God created us, and not be trying to, fight against that. And so I hope that we get to that in our conversation.
Even that's a good like example of like, most talk about this in Christian circles that I've heard it is about whether you kind of are a woman or you aren't, whether you are like a real man or a real woman, and real women do this and real men do this, which is just such a kind of a one-sided performance-oriented way of thinking about this.
Well, it's like you have to achieve manhood or achieve womanhood or become that. And it's like you are born one of these and you grow into it in really beautiful ways.
Yeah, we're talking about growing up as like becoming human.
Right.
Like, are you a real human? Like, I don't know. like, do you like, do you not do laundry? Like no, you
I think that's called adulting.
Yeah. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, there's something really interesting to that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about the conference too, is I think there's something beautiful about this and restful, and not just for myself, or if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, well, I don't really feel a sense of unease, about any of this. Fair enough. But there's something about us doing this together. And there's a way in which it's not just about whether you're comfortable with how this is playing out in your own life. It's about how there's something about being men and women in various strata of life coming together and functioning as a body, as a family, that's kind of amazing and brings that rest from the outside. And you can bring rest to someone else. There's a lot we could go into here, but I think there's something really powerful there. And I want that sense of rest and I want to say kind of clarity, or there's a settledness and a sense of, from here, I know how to move forward, that I've gotten out of these conversations too, just relationally. Like, I feel like I know what the church could look like in a way that I didn't feel like I had a vision for before. And I know what us in the world could look like. And I know what us, in different homes, all these different things. And that's been something I really do want to share with people, because I think a lot of people don't experience that. And even if you don't feel any unease, you still aren't feeling that sense of vision and rest and kind of beauty.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because you might have like a personal sense of who you are and feel comfortable in that. But the church relational, like, there's been challenges there, and the way that we framed what manhood or womanhood is sometimes keeps us really far apart. Like, we don't interact as brothers and sisters in a way that is really healthy as a family because of certain fears maybe that have kind of crept in, or different ways that we've processed how we're supposed to engage. And so really reshaping how we act as men and women together in the family in a way that's healthy and loving and like communal. I think that's just a beautiful picture of what God has designed.
All right, so Brian, I want you to describe how we're going to talk about this, because it may seem random to ask you to like literally walk through what this conference is going to look like. But it's kind of like if you're interested in reading a book, one of the things you do is take a look at the table of contents, right? Like, how are they going to handle this? How are they going to talk about it? Like, what's the flow? And I actually think that the table of contents of this upcoming conference is it conveys a lot about how we're going to go about this, and why we decided that 8 hours was actually the right amount of time to do something like this.
If the 8 hours goes well, we will all take credit for it. And if it doesn't, we will let you know whose idea it was.
I think the table of contents helps explain why the 8 hours you got there.
So I'll try and kind of nutshell it. So there's three main parts. Part one is what are men and women. Part two is how things go wrong. And part three is like living it out in the church, the home, and the world. So there's kind of let's start with the basics and see if we can nail those down. Then why doesn't it look that way? Like why is that not the way it looks? And what are the specific ways that it goes south? And then how do we then, like, as redeemed people, pursue a redeemed version of the good created things that we have in our manhood and womanhood in like the home, the church, and the world. So like that, and that's like morning, early afternoon, and late afternoon. And so do you want me?
I want you to go deeper. I want you to go deeper, because I want you to like just explain why you want to talk about the specific topics or passages or things like that you want to talk about, and kind of how we're going to try to do that. So
in the first one, what are men and women? The first thing is like basically why talk about this. So take a while because I think when you explore all the things that are going on in some ways culturally, in some ways individually with the church, a lot of the things we just asked, really going deep into like, here's why a lot of us feel the way we feel about this topic, even if we don't think about it a lot. So a lot of us have opinions or thoughts or emotions tied up in this topic that we might not even know we have, and we definitely don't know where they come from, or if we do, we think it's for one reason when it's actually for like 12. And so getting a sense, let's clear the field. Let's get a sense of why we're talking about this and where we're all coming from in that conversation. So we're going to do that first. And then we're going to go through scripture, basically Genesis 1 and 2, and look at these passages of creation in a way that most of us haven't been taught to look at them. That's not to say it's novel. If anything, the way we've been taught to look at them is actually novel. The Christian tradition has a long line of looking at Genesis 1 and 2 in a particular way and drawing things out by paying very deep attention to the actual words that are being said and the way that they're being said. And there's a way that all of that, even before you get to the creation of men and women, has to do with men and women. It's a really interesting, you'll see if you come to the conference, but Genesis 1 and 2 have a lot to tell us about what our identity is as created people and how those relate to each other. And so we're going to land there with some attempt at a definition
They're
of men and women.
perfect definitions, right?
Yes, unassailable definitions that we've only changed 50 to 60 times.
Yes.
So, but at some point, trying to can you sum up this stuff with an 80% level of accuracy?
Yes.
Can you try and get a definition going that feels like it includes at least as much as it leaves out? Whereas most definitions I've read about men and women really just all you can think about is what's not there, not what is there.
Yeah.
And so we're going to try and get at that from Genesis 1 and 2 so you know how that works. Like, you know what those connection points are. It's not coming out of a random, like, cultural idea of what men and women are or something else like that. And then we're going to kind of reflect on those definitions and unpack them. So there's specific words we're going to use, like terms, concepts. And that's where each of us are kind of, well, I will have had my turn at that point. And the two of you are going to get a chance to individually reflect on the definition of men, definition of women, and try and kind of unpack them and trace them out in a reflective kind of way towards how these things can actually function. And I'll do a little bit of trying to clear the field of, like, here's what these aren't. Because most of the time you need to do a lot of that before you can get to accurate reflection without people kind of, not getting caught up and distracted by these things that they might think they mean when they don't mean that. But bottom line, we're just trying to mine Genesis 1 and 2 for what men and women are and what they're created to be, because that's what the rest of the Bible does. Is it always, anytime you get a gendered passage in the Bible, it almost always goes back to Genesis 1 and 2. Yeah. And so that's the first one. Second one, if we want to keep going.
Yeah.
The second one's how things go wrong.
This is the appropriate depth. This is what I was looking for.
Excellent. All right. So how things go wrong. It sounds simple, but we're going to go to Genesis 3 and look at that maybe in a way different than most people look at it. You're not kind of cherry picking out things about men and women. You're looking at the entire structure of that chapter as it relates to Genesis 1 and 2 to talk about what goes wrong in sin and how that leads to a certain posture that we have that's going to it's going to push us to live against the grain of created reality. So we're basically going to try and run against these definitions and recreate ourselves in some way, shape, or form. And you're going to get that, how that looks, and a lot of that out of Genesis 3. And then we're going to kind of sit down in a round table and talk about, okay, so what does that actually look like now? There's a million ways that's looked in the last, thousands and thousands of years. What does it look like now where we're sitting? And at least from our perspective, the three of us. And so we'll talk there probably about things like power dynamics. A lot of gender today is talked about in terms of power. So how does the Bible's explanation of how things go wrong help us understand gender and power? There's a lot of, another topic would be, there's not really a word for this, but I picked up the phrase identicalism, or the term identicalism from, I can't remember who at this point, because there's also a way that one of the things that's gone wrong is that we've lost sight of the differences between men and women, and we've tried to make everyone like the same across the board. And that is its own version of things going wrong. And it also creates its own kind of damage. And then we'll talk a little bit about just personal struggles too. Like, that's a very cultural, very societal, very relational in some ways. What are the things that on a more individual level we feel in how things going wrong affect us in terms of our gender and those struggles? And we'll follow that up with some reflections on redemption, which is basically, now that we've seen how it goes wrong, how does Christ get them to go right? And how can we move forward from here with a sense of hope? Because when you look closely enough at how sin has impacted something like gender, which is so close to our identity as human beings, it's going to have a very deep, pervasive, and personal pain associated with that damage. Yeah. And so there's going to be a sense where we need to end on hope, because there is hope. But after spending that much time thinking, kind of tracing out where things go wrong, we need to spend some time there to make sure we're ready to move forward.
Yeah.
That's the second one. The third one is just the application. So then I'm going to take a stab at going through some of those passages that deal with gender directly in the New Testament. Think Ephesians 5 and marriage, 1 Corinthians 11 and head covering, 1 Timothy 2 and like teaching and having authority.
I'm so ready for head coverings.
I am. Same.
Right? Did you think that?
I'm like, please.
So
Let's discuss.
I've been a pastor for 16 years. I still don't have confidence in my interpretation of 1 Corinthians 11. I'll be totally honest with you.
I'm not sure if this.
No, you're going to
This
solve
is
it.
gonna do it.
No,
Come on, Brian. Pressure's on.
You promised. You promised. I just heard it.
I will talk about them. There's a kind of grammar or logic in all of these passages that does different things, and we won't be able to go into all of the complexity of that. That's more of an academic kind of discussion. For the purposes of the conference, we're trying to go, okay, so like, what does it look like then for the rest of the Bible to look back at Genesis 1 and 2 through Genesis 3 and say, here's how redemption takes our gender and puts it to work in the world in different dynamic, organic relationships. So think the home and then the church and then the world.
Yeah.
We'll try and land there with some sense of, okay, let's try and drill down to, here's a rough idea of what it actually looks like. That one of the difficult things with this topic is you either end up with people who go extremely practical in ways that feel superficial and thin. It's like, oh, men do this, women do this, and here's how it applies.
And that's how you get to the list of jobs. Like, these are the jobs you're allowed.
Yeah, exactly. It's all kind of activities, or you get into this really ethereal kind of exploratory, almost poetic sort of, men are men, man. And women, they're just women, and look at all the Bible says, and there's really no sense of like, so what now? And so we're trying to thread that needle and do both, and have some sense of this has practical application without making it thin and superficial. And then from there, we're going to have a roundtable with the three of us, just exploring those implications for like the church and the home and the world, because at some point, it's one thing to go from Scripture and get a sense of, I don't want to call it just a theory, but a sense of the reality of this. It's another thing to sit down with three human beings and just kind of go, okay, so now what? And talk through the challenges and the opportunities and some of the vision for that. So there's our conference, which is, again, is why you can see why we ended up going, well, we can't just do one of those. That doesn't work. So we kind of got to do all of them. How do we do it? Well, we're gonna go 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah. So what I hear you say is, you're going to answer all my questions. And we're going to be done.
Perfect.
Done. You're like, wait, that's not what I said. No. I think it actually draws this out really powerfully, because I think that in one sense, I hope that we have a lot of questions answered and clarified. And at the same time, what you're not after giving a answer key.
Right.
Hey, what question do you have? Here's the right answer. This isn't like a Manhood and Womanhood catechism, right? Where you just like memorize all the right answers, but it's understanding it more deeply, so that as we navigate life in a complex world with complex relationships in all sorts of diverse settings, we have the tools to apply and live out our manhood and womanhood in all of these different spaces.
Yeah, I think one of it's an interesting topic, because if I said, what's the definition of being human? And one of the old ones is a rational animal. And I'd give you that. You go, okay, like fair enough. But that definitions don't work the same way with something this wide and broad and deep and complicated. There's something, the closer you get to creation itself, to kind of universal, transcendent things, the harder you can just go like, oh, there's the definition, and that catches all of it.
Yeah.
And being a man and woman is so tightly knit with being human, because in creation, it's in the image of God, he created him, man and woman, he created them. Like it's woven all together. So you can't study being human with an answer key. You can't do it with the back of the book approach.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get one thing, but you're going to miss a whole lot of other stuff that's actually really important. And you just can't do it that way. And so you need to immerse yourself in the text of Scripture, in a lot of thought, a lot of meditation, a lot of kind of soaking in ideas and things, because that's the kind of topic this is. At the same time, I think that when you approach it that way, with a nice big conference that gives you stuff to soak in, and then you leave with it, you have the ability then to begin to make connections with the fact that I really do think that a lot of the things that we will be surprised by how many of the questions we have, the struggles that we have, either end up being not the right kind of questions that we were supposed to be asking, and we're glad to have found that out because the other questions are better and richer and deeper, or that a lot of the things we struggle with that we never connected to gender at all find themselves answered in a different way and kind of intersecting with stuff we're talking about here, because we're really talking about what it means to be human. And so there's a beauty to this, that taking this approach won't give you an answer key, but it will give you something to dwell in and on as we look at ourselves through the knowledge of God that he gives us.
Yeah. And so as you're listening to this, I imagine you get the sense that Brian in particular has done a lot of the heavy lifting in preparation for this conference for us. And this is something that committed himself to soak in for our sake, even our sake as a church. And one of the things that I'm so excited for is for our church family to glean from the depth of study that you've put into this as we grow together. I mean, I want to ask you, because we've been having these conversations for a few years now, and you've even seen kind of had a front row seat to even seeing how this has developed and deepened and enriched, and how it's taken shape over the last couple of years. Why are you particularly excited to hear from Brian on this topic?
Oh gosh, where do I start? This topic has been really meaningful to me for a long time. I don't know if you remember this, Scott, but my husband Phil and I sat down with Scott right after, maybe a year after marriage, and we were like, should we have kids? Because we were in this place where we're like, we're millennials, we have debt. And I was like, I'm either going to hit menopause by the point I can pay these off and stay home, or like we could have kids now and I could work, and is that allowed? And so that kind of kicked off a journey for me. And I feel like I read all over the spectrum. And even once the three of us kind of were like, okay, we're doing this, we're going to sit down, you guys handed me a stack of books. A lot of those books we ended up tossing, and we moved on to another stack and these essays and those podcasts, and we've read a lot together. And I'm just so excited. I know that, I feel like Brian kind of synthesized from his research and handed some stuff to us. But I know that this has been something you've been really soaking in. And so as we're trying to wrap our heads around it and communicate it well, I still have questions. I mean, this has been like a decade of me reading all the popular books, and then looking up in the index their source material, reading those books. And I still, like you said, there are certain passages that I'm like, I don't feel like I have a good way to explain this, or I can't quite put my finger on it. And so I know you're not going to give us everything, but I feel like you're going to be able to give us so much and give us a certain framework that helps clear out some of maybe the baggage that we've got over the years from this topic.
Yeah. So I want to return the favor, because there's actually a reason Meredith's here. And I mean, I didn't mean that as it came out. There's not actually a reason Meredith's here. Insert foot. That was great. No, there's a reason Meredith's here, and it's in large part because of this journey you've been on, and not just the journey you've been on and the questions you've been asking, but the wisdom with which you've been answering them and striving to answer them, and kind of coming. And I think it's been super encouraging to me to see how you have navigated those types of questions, captivated by truth, also filled with grace, and an open heart that just wants whatever the Lord has. And so, Brian, I want to ask you why you are particularly excited that Meredith is going to be a part of this and is going to be a part of communicating what this looks like on the ground for us as a church.
Yeah, it's not hard. I think as much as I've done a lot of hopefully constructive work in this area, basically I have all these things in the back of my head and I'm trying to put them all together and I bring them together and I have all these, these are the ideas and the stuff. And then we sit down, with Mare and she just says like a few sentences and like, yeah, well, yeah, that though, like that's that, like that thing. And there's a way that you have a sense of the meaning of this stuff and what makes it significant for people without losing sight of the fact that it's something you have to actually think hard about. And a lot of people, in my experience, it's kind of one or the other. Plus, you know how to talk about it well. Like when you say stuff, it's like, yeah, that's a good way to say that. And so for me, I tend to like to listen to what you say because it makes me go, yeah, that thing. Like like that's what we were trying to get at. Like that's the way it is. And I think that you also have a way of doing that from a unique place of experience, not just because you've read stuff for like a decade, which is true, you have, but also because you've walked through personally a lot of the different arenas where especially women tend to go, I don't know what to do here. I don't know how to feel about this. And you've like been like, I don't know how to feel about it. So I'm going to like think hard about it and see if I can figure it out. And you've done that without coming up with an answer key. And so like, there's just this way that I feel like our interactions, especially the three of us, have modeled to me what I think it's a little self-congratulatory now that it comes out of my mouth. But they have. I mean, there's a way that I'm like, this is what I feel like this is what it's supposed to be like. There's supposed to be a kind of mutuality that's submitting to something larger than us.
Yeah.
And enjoying that process and being able to like be helped by each other. And there's a way that I'm like, this just feels right. And so the idea of you getting to talk the way you've talked with us in front of other people, yeah, it's super exciting. I could keep going, but I think that's probably enough.
And that's a part of why when I think about this conference, it's almost not like conference isn't the right word because we've done lots of different things we've called conferences before. Yeah. I don't know we've ever done anything like this before.
Yeah, the structure is really different.
The structure's different. I think I'm so excited about the richness of what the Lord is doing and how this will shape us as individuals and us as a church, us as a family going forward. Part of why I'm particularly excited to hear from both of you is because I think that you're both exemplary in this, and not perfect, but like Brian, I think you are exemplary, an example to be followed in biblical manhood that is fully orbed, that is nuanced and rich, and I'm excited for your kind of gift of communication to be able to put words to that in a way that helps lead us forward. And Meredith, I think you are exemplary in what it means and looks like to manifest biblical womanhood. And I'm excited for the gift of communication the Lord's given you to be able to put words to that in a way that blesses and leads us forward too. And in that sense, this is so exciting is not even the right word, because it's not just like, oh, it's energizing, but there's a richness and a depth that I'm anticipating getting to explore and experience together as we do this, that I can't wait for the sake of our church family. And it's part of why we wanted to talk about this, because it's not like anything we've done before. And we want you, if you're listening, to catch a glimpse of that as we prepare for it. Now, I mean,
we also want to hear you talk, Scott.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No, so I just feel blessed to have gotten to be kind of a thought partner in this, and partially because I'm asking these same questions. I think we're all asking these same questions and thinking through this. It does make me think, though. I want to talk, and again, this is a normal podcast episode, but I want to talk really specifically about the logistics. I think there's a few questions that come up with this. Number one, yes, this will be recorded. Right. So I don't want that to discourage you from coming and from prioritizing May 21st. We really want you to be there because I think there is something I think we realize this, right? There's something unique and powerful about being in the room together, wrestling through this together, being able to even have conversations on breaks and afterwards at lunch, being able to have conversations over lunch tables together. But at the same time, we recognize that's not realistic or feasible for everybody. And so it will be recorded, video and audio, and live streamed. And so we will have that. As far as logistics go, we do plan on having childcare. We also recognize that all day Saturday childcare, some of you like all day at church might work great for your kids. And that sounds like great. We're also mentioning this now so that if that's not a scenario that would work well for your children, you could try to make other arrangements, right? Whether it's neighbors, extended family, whatever, that if you have enough time, you might be able to organize and create something like that. As part of why we want to let you know about that. And so we both will have childcare and also recognize that for 8 hours,
not every
most
kid's
of you
gonna
probably,
thrive on
yeah,
that
most of you probably aren't going to take
schedule.
advantage of it, but some will. And that there's also probably a scenario in which if you can only make the morning, like come for the morning. We're going to serve lunch. So you don't have to like try to figure out lunch. We're going to serve lunch. We'll probably have like a, $10 suggested donation for the conference, something like this. Actually, this part I'm making up as we go right now.
Confidence though.
That's right. We're gonna provide that for you, and it'll be here on campus, so you don't have to kind of worry about that for you and kids if they're here. And so then we'll break it up into these 3 sections. And so if you can only come for 1 or 2 of them, we'd encourage you to come be a part of that. They will build on each other, so it probably makes more sense to come for the first one, and if you have to leave early, then to skip the first 2 and come for the third.
Yeah, you might end up a little confused.
But it's worth coming. If you can come to any of it, it's worth coming because even if you just come to one piece of it, there's something about being there. Like most of our audio right now is consumed. It's like skimming. It's like skim reading.
Yeah.
And the way that we're trying to do this, and just honestly, just personally having gone through a lot of this material myself, it's just not the kind of thing you skim and get a few topic sentences and kind of get a sense of it or see what stands out while you're driving in the car or whatever. At least if you come to some of it, you're going to end up in this place where you had this focused time of kind of immersion in the topic, so that then if you listen to other stuff, you're probably more prone to think more deeply about it than to just kind of skim listen. And yeah, some things can really do well with that. There's some podcasts that that's what they're for, is that kind of skim listening. This is just harder to do because it's not like, here's the main point. It's like, let's sit in scripture in different ways and let it speak to us in different ways and draw things out of that. So I encourage you to come to some of it. If you don't think that if I can't come to all of it, I'll just listen to all of it. If you can make some of it, I really do encourage you to come because I think it's going to be better for you overall.
Yeah.
All right. So May 21st, 9 a.m. This first session will start at 9 a.m. We'll have like brunch starting at 8:30, 9 a.m. I'm making this
or
up
breakfast
as we go
at 8:30. Yeah.
All right.
I don't
Not brunch. Sorry.
Brunch is in between.
Brunch feels like something you can like kind of grab and go. But that's not
continental
true.
breakfast?
That's not true. Continental breakfast. That's the word I'm looking for.
Continental breakfast.
By
brunch
brunch
is more like 11sies.
Yeah, no, we're not going to have mimosas. That's not. We're not starting off. Can make for an interesting conference, but we'll do that at a different conference.
Different conference.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
This has just been such a labor of love, and it's really been a delight to get to participate in these conversations. And every time we have a meeting for planning purposes, it truly is like bouncing a lot of ideas off of each other. And one person suggests certain language, and then it makes me think about the topics in new ways. And I'm just so excited to finally get to share that out because it really has been a delight to prepare for.
It's a good last word.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Meredith. Thank
Absolutely.
you for the time in all of those
countless
ways. And particularly the time today to get to share even this little bit of your heart with us. Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Can't wait.
Thanks for listening. We love you, and we'll see you on Sunday.